So I feel myself up here and there's a lot of energy, and then I feel myself down here and I feel I'm experiencing depression. Whatever it is that you might have experienced personally, that you might have noticed personally, or that a medical professional may have discussed with you, that grounding is gold.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the different, I think it's okay to separate things out. I'm
Yeah.
still learning, but you have a three-pronged model. So I felt like that was a good way to. So if you could talk about like the different practices and the different purposes that they serve, could you talk to our audience a bit about that, and how
Yeah.
understanding what they are will be more benefit, help them to gain greater benefit from yoga?
Yeah. So I appreciate you what you shared about your awareness of a more vigorous practice not being a fit at a particular time. One of the things I think the sort of the binaries almost that we're trapped in a little bit also in our offerings in yoga, in a US context at least, and in many Western contexts, is we either offer active or we offer restorative. And there's also this idea that active is somehow like more advanced. So yoga studios will say things like, they'll label classes like level 2, level 3, level 4, and say things to students like, well, you can start at this one and then gradually like kind of build up heat. And it's like, we can build up heat when it's appropriate to build up heat, and we can calm and be sort of more restorative when that fits too. But neither of these is sort of even keel. One of the things about a yoga practice and sort of traditional yoga is that traditional yoga has something that's referred to as the different sort of limbs of yoga. That it starts with what's referred to in Sanskrit as yamas and niyamas that have to do with ethics towards self and towards others. And then moving on to the physical practice, asana, and then pranayama, the breath work, and moving up to meditation. And I like to highlight that because a lot of the time we're like, oh, okay, I'm going to go from me rushing around with 50 thoughts in my head to boom, I sit down and I'm anticipating that this amazing enlightenment will happen. And people will often say, well, I tried to meditate and it didn't work for me because I had too many thoughts. Well, of course, because A, we're human and that's how it goes. But B, also, when we turn inward like that, of course, what we're doing if we don't have the regular practice yet is that we just notice more everything that's in here. And if everything that's in here is tumultuous and feels really jarring, then now I'm sitting with what feels more jarring. And if I'm having a time in life, whether an hour, a day, weeks, months, where, as you phrased it, I feel like my mind has been hijacked, then now I'm sitting here with that. How is that going to help me feel that I'm working towards that stilling of the fluctuations of the mind? I'm actually making myself meet that more. That's not where to be, right? So one of the things about the physical part of the practice, the asana, is that the core physical postures that often in regular day-to-day yoga classes, people think of as kind of like dull, are very grounding. So mountain pose being a big one, downward dog that you mentioned being another one. So even though downward dog, so the shape in downward dog for folks who may be unfamiliar with it is it's almost like your body is making a triangle with the floor. So your feet are at least your toes and possibly more of your foot, kind of depending on what's going on with your calves, hamstrings, etc., are on the floor. Your hands are on the floor and your body is making that triangle with the floor. That's actually pretty grounding. The hands are making contact with the floor. At least some portion of the foot is making contact with the floor. It is both a forward bend and a back bend because of what the spine is doing. But yeah, it's still pretty grounding. Yeah. So mountain pose, that's a standing pose. Tadasana In Sanskrit, that's grounding. That helps me be in the here and now. Yoga also has a lot of practices that are open-eyed. And so when we're thinking from the perspective of yoga therapy, me closing my eyes takes me inward, takes me more into what sort of the clutter that might be in my mind at that moment. Me focusing outward connects me with what's around me, especially if I have a steadier gaze. That's a large part of the principle behind my three-pronged model. So a lot of the time, we think that, oh, if I just do something that's calming and I do slow breaths, then I'll feel better. And that's where, if I'm overstimulated and I do slow breaths, actually, I potentially can get more anxious. Same with sometimes if I'm agitated or if I'm feeling kind of slow moving, I want to push myself towards a more active practice. And interestingly, almost every time I give a training, there's somebody in the group who shares about a personal experience, either about themselves or someone they know, where they took a more active yoga class at a time where it didn't fit them emotionally, and they felt really agitated and really irritated afterwards because it wasn't a fit for the time. So if we start with the grounding, and that's the first prong, grounding, who of us is harmed by trying to ground more? Pretty much none of us, right? Most of us go through our day-to-day lives relatively ungrounded. And the more that we can ground ourselves, so grounding usually entails more solid practices on the physical level, both sides of the body making contact with the floor or the chair or whatever it is that we're sitting on, open-eyed. Yeah, that symmetry, that I might do something where I raise both my arms, that's symmetrical, or I raise one and then the other, depending on the axis of my body, but internally, and that's that piece where it's about the internal experience, not the outside form. Internally, I'm utilizing that symmetry, both sides of my body. That helps me ground. When I'm in a position where I feel okay, I can return to a grounded place relatively smoothly. And sometimes that's our entire life, our entire life's work. And sometimes I arrive at that relatively, not quickly, but with more regularity sooner. Then I can explore the other prongs, raising my energy level or calming down my system. For those of us who might have been given diagnoses or have individual experiences with feelings of up and down. So I feel myself up here and there's a lot of energy, and then I feel myself down here and I feel I'm experiencing depression. Whatever it is that you might have experienced personally, that you might have noticed personally, or that a medical professional may have discussed with you, that grounding is gold.
Yeah.
If we ground and ground and ground and ground some more, that is amazing. And in that strange system that we have in the West, where we say something's advanced because somehow it's like an arm balance, or basically it's actually less of me making contact with the floor a lot of the time when we're labeling it advanced, that's very ungrounding. That's not advanced at all in terms of an internal practice. That's that outward form again. Yeah. From an internal practice, being with something, staying with something, with the grounding, that is what keeps us going. And advanced, I think of as meaning that I am more in tune with what I need in my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And that's what helps me be there. And then if I feel in tune, I'd like to work a little bit to lift my energy, then, there's some practices that I can do. And again, to help myself feel calmer, practices I can do. And then always coming back to that grounding.